Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our FOGAH Pre-Program Summer Conservation Internship presentations. We have our two wonderful interns, Sara Lanham and Jenni Krchak, who have been amazing for these past 10 weeks, and it's really flown by. And they are going to take this opportunity to tell you a bit more about the projects they've been working on and what they've learned about conservation. For a bit of background, Sara will be going first. She is from Chattanooga, and this is her first internship. And she has been learning very swiftly, and we're very proud of what she's achieved. And this is Jenni's third internship. And it's also her first in paper, so she's also had quite a steep learning curve and also done a fantastic job. And you'll see some of the work that they've done very shortly. And I am going to hand it over to the two of them, with Sara starting first. Sara.
Thank you, Sigourney. Good morning, guys. Thank you for being here, and thank you to everyone who's out there in the ether watching. As Sigourney said, I'm Sara Lanham. My wonderful fellow intern, Jenni Krchak, and I are pre-program students in conservation, which means that we're working to meet the requirements needed to apply to graduate programs. Interning here for the past 10 weeks, it's been such a pleasure to cross paths with all of the archives staff and to meet some of the FOGAH board already online via Skype. I wanted to say that Jenni and I have felt such tremendous support and care that exists for this program and for its participants here. Neither one of us could have asked for more, quite honestly. So I wanted to thank everyone sincerely for making this opportunity possible. I'd also like to recognize our teachers, Sigourney and Tracy. These two have been nothing short of brilliant in running this program. It's just been really inspiring. I've watched the two of them challenge themselves pretty much daily to work harder and continue to learn in much the same manner that Jenni and I have been doing ourselves. So it's been really inspiring. Thank you guys, sincerely. Yeah, we're all tearing up at this point. Now, if anyone was worried that they were going to sit through two consecutive versions of basically the same talk, fear not. Jenni and I have it all planned out. I'm going to do sort of more of a global level overview of conservation since I'm pretty much a lot newer to this than Jenni is. And Jenni's going to take you through a little more of a play-by-play of the internship. And hopefully together the two talks will help elucidate what we've been learning and also both of our kind of different perspectives on the work. So without further ado, I'll set the scene for our internship a little here. You guys are going to have to forgive me for having way too much fun with PowerPoint. I'm coming off of basically a decade of super low-tech work. I figured for my return to PowerPoint after 10 years, I should have a quotation. And this one seemed to sum up this summer for me and probably a lot of people. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, our buddy Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. Jenni and I have both felt incredibly lucky to be doing this program at all, but also in 2020. Pre-program internships are usually incredibly competitive. They have large pools of really amazing candidates. So just landing these slots in this program, that is what the confetti is about. And then, of course, at the very same time, we have COVID-19. So, enough said. I'm going to tell you guys a little about my background coming into this. So, on screen, this is a snapshot of my life until very recently. As Sigourney said, this is my first internship in conservation. Doing this program for me is signaling my commitment to pursuing the profession as a midlife career change. Conservation is something I thought about years ago in college, but I ended up moving in a different direction at the time. So this is really bringing things full circle for me. I earned my BA in art history with a minor in studio art in 2003, and that led to a lot of hands-on work history, a lot of which you can see here in the photographs. So you can see artisan baking. I've done a fair amount of farming and gardening. I've worked with animals, especially cats and horses. And also, most recently, I've been volunteering hundreds of hours in museum collections and archives to research the idea of this shift. In my more distant past, which is not pictured, are metalsmithing and bookbinding. So anyone looking to pursue an MS in conservation faces an undetermined number of years, pretty much, of pre-program work, and has to be really flexible and willing to travel for that work. We're also advised to be prepared to apply to the competitive American graduate programs several consecutive years before either being accepted or possibly giving up, quite honestly. Coming into conservation as a second or third career is not rare at all, actually, in the field. But of course, as you can imagine, making the choice to do a different career isn't easy. It means possibly giving up a steady job and house, leaving friends, family, pets behind, all that jazz. Bottom line, to do conservation, to do the pre-program work, whoops, it is going to change my slides for me. We have basically committed to embracing a certain level of uncertainty for a while. So this is pretty much what my reality looks like now. To try to start to find some shape in all this, I set myself a really simple agenda for this internship. I was able to do that partly because I knew I was in really good, safe hands with Sigourney and Tracy. And I knew I would get the direction and guidance that I needed. So the question that I set for myself to answer was, what is conservation? And really this should read, what is conservation to me? My number one goal was to get practical and theoretical learning to begin to answer this question, but in my own words. By doing so, then I can move from there to identify possible ways that I will plug into this profession. So as I discover what is conservation, it's been important to me to begin with a very open mind before zooming in on any one niche, because one thing I'm learning, conservation contains multitudes. Oh my, looks like one of my slides maybe got lost in translation. That should read, conservation contains multitudes. It's a small, somewhat obscure field, but one thing I'm learning is how vast the territory in that field is once you step inside. It's really incredible. So falling under the umbrella term of cultural heritage conservation are so many types of work and expertise. For starters, we could look at different settings that conservation happens. A lot of people do private practice. Some people work in public institutions, so galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. We could look at the different disciplines that conservation is anchored in. Just some examples would be history, art, archaeology, even analytical chemistry. These arenas and areas of expertise can be adjacent to, intertwined with, and integrated with one another. So that makes this work both very multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. So what all conservators have in common is a mission to keep items of cultural importance safe over time for study, display, aesthetic appreciation, and/or information. We're making things last longer, not forever. In this internship, we've talked about the deep level on which conservators have to accept that everything has a lifespan. Nothing lasts forever, not even Stonehenge, not even the pyramids. So I wanted to show you a smattering of examples of what might fall under a conservator's purview. This makes me so happy. Let me see if I can go through this while the slide stays up before it changes. All of this is conservation, folks, and that's why I think it's so fun. So starting at the top left here, we have an emerald Cartier necklace. We have a stamp from Hong Kong, a Huron quillwork moccasin, an Aboriginal dot painting. We have a bound Korean sutra. We have an example of folk art from New Mexico depicting the Virgin of Guadalupe. We have a Campbell's soup can Warhol screen print. Down on the left there, Dead Sea Scroll fragments, an Egyptian sarcophagus, a field notebook from the Smithsonian's collection, an I Voted button from 2004. We have some roof sculptures from the Paris Opera. We have a compass. I confess that's a stock image. We have a Helen Frankenthaler oil on canvas, a Japanese fan, a piece of Roman glassware, the entire site of Machu Picchu, Peru, and finally an ambrotype of Frederick Douglass. How exciting is all of this? I just wanted to make a giant collage to show you guys a fraction of the scope of conservation. And still, I haven't compiled anything close to a representative sampling here. For our internship, Jenni and I focused only on paper, or maybe you could say paper and friends, and look at the diversity of objects that we worked with just within that subcategory. Jenni's going to take you in a little more detail through a lot of these projects, so don't worry about that. This is more just a whirlwind view of some of the different formats that we've been able to work with. You can see some of our practice projects here, as well as some of the items from the collection itself that we treated. So you can see there's several different formats even. There's just flat work and there's bound, and then I guess you could say there's sort of a crumpled, courtesy of Sigourney. As far as content, we have artwork, documents, drawings, prints, books, letters, photographs, and maps. And as far as materials, we have European and Japanese style papers, leather, parchment, oops, sorry guys. Leather, parchment, multiple photographic techniques in one album, and all of that has various adhesives and media applied to it. So again, just demonstrating the variety even in one small corner of the profession. A lot of conservators comment on how much they love that about this work. Okay, now it's time for the next slide. So speaking of variety, let's revisit the idea of conservation's position at the convergence of many disciplines. It's often described as requiring a three-legged stool of art connoisseurship, craftsmanship, and sciences. And in its more science-driven forms, it can actually engage all of the components of the STEAM acronym. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. But in any form, it's really kind of an incredible mashup between left brain and right brain work. Another thing that a lot of conservators appreciate. So as long as I'm using the word mashup, let's take a quick look at how that plays out in the tools of conservation. Because conservators have almost zero manufacturers that make equipment specifically for us, we co-opt and adapt tools from other fields like crazy. That conservation engages so many different fields means that we collectively know about and can repurpose methods and instruments from all of those areas. And you can see a little bit of that here. A lot of these start out as kind of hacks and get circulated and then accepted, and then eventually they become part of new conservators training. And because the field is young and small, this can all happen pretty quickly. So it's kind of neat. So you can see a variety of things here on the screen. I'm not going to narrate all of them, but I would like to point out Sigourney deftly maneuvering our suction platen. You can see one of my favorites on the left is porcupine quills. They're this perfect little accessory to apply a point of pressure firmly but gently. I myself have a few ideas for specialized tools from my own past that maybe I'll get to bring to conservation. So quickly, from bakery work, bench scrapers, metal bench scrapers, plastic dough scrapers, which could even be cut down. I'm not sure if a silicone Silpat baking sheet would have applications, but it would be fun to try to support maybe something delicate or wet without having it stick. Who knows? I think I'll be playing. From metalworking, a lot of ideas for holding and clipping things in place. Supporting things in conservation is important so that we don't damage them. So Jenni and I both actually thought about third arms or third hands, depending on what you call it. The other thing I thought about was a lot of times when you use an oxyacetylene torch, you may have a really nifty magnetized stand that supports it. And I began to wonder if there might be a way to adapt some kind of stand like that to be used in conservation. Just some ideas. So we've taken a few angles on how this work bends genres and can feel kind of like this strangely unified smorgasbord. Another way of looking at that is to examine the ways in which a lot of objects incorporate multiple materials in different fashions, which of course affects treatment and preservation considerations. This is fantastic for me because it means there are different ways that I could choose to specialize that would all potentially scratch my conservation itches. So I'd like to look at some materials with you guys that I'm particularly into, and then take a look at a few of their permutations together. So first off, of course, we're going to start with a few basic single materials and then start combining. Paper. We have a beautiful laid sheet of paper. This is at the Robert C. Williams Paper Museum, which is in Atlanta. And obviously, you guys know I'm interested in paper or I wouldn't be here. It was one of 3 specializations I identified for myself as potential good fits a long time ago. The feel of paper and its qualities as an organic material to the touch are part of the draw for me. A lot of conservators have advised me to take a look at materials that I just naturally simply love. And for me, that's very true of paper. It's also true for textiles. I have a similar natural pre-existing love for fabrics, and I've always been drawn to sewing and crafting with cloth. Like paper, fabrics have a softness and pliability and warmth to them that appeals. It also has the same quality of being a flat material or a 3D material. Fabric has a hand, meaning the way it will drape and handle, and I sense this quality in paper as well. It could be related to the rattle that Sigourney taught us about that every paper has. If you rattle it up by your ear, you can hear the differences in all of the papers. This is just a stock photo of a synthetic woven textile. Brings me to plastics. I didn't realize how interested I am in plastics until recently, and this internship reinforced that for me. So definitely a direction to inquire. This is a stack of cellulose nitrate negatives that were discovered in an Antarctic exploration hut. Plastic itself is an organic material, just like paper and textiles, and maybe that's why I like it. I'm not sure. But I shared this particular sort of ugly image with you guys so that I could touch on a concept that plastics embody really well, which is inherent vice. That's what we call the different ways that materials self-destruct over time. So for instance, plastics can lose their shape and flexibility and break down in a self-fueling chemical reaction that can happen really fast once it starts. Wood pulp paper similarly will become yellowed, brittle, and crumble to pieces. Metals will rust. So knowing the ways that materials are predisposed to fall apart is important for a conservator. I mean, you're going to be working with it, so you might as well be interested in that part of the materials that you choose. So as long as we're talking about materials here, I did want to put a plug in for pigments. This is a display of assorted pigments that were identified in the paint of a foundered 17th century Swedish warship. How cool is that? We didn't work a ton with colors and pigments in this internship, actually, but what we did was amazingly fun, and I think Jenni would agree. I know that I need to look more into color matching because that was really enjoyable to try to create toned Japanese tissue to match particular colors of book cloth. I also enjoy pigments and their history. For instance, one of my most recent fascinations has been that of arsenic green, which was yielded an amazing emerald green shade that proliferated during the 1800s, despite the fact that it was known to be poisonous at the time. It's all about beauty. Okay, so how can I start combining these materials to create added interest and complexity of the objects? Here we have a pastel on laid paper by Degas from 1878, Two Seated Women. This is a flat, planar piece, just like a sheet of paper, but it incorporates color and somewhat spicy media. The pastel in this example is friable, meaning it may not stay put on the paper when we start moving it around. Herbarium specimens. These interest me because of my background in plants. This is a picture of samples from the collection of the State Herbarium in South Australia. So this is flat paper with dried flat-ish plant material, again with the organic materials. Taking things a little more in the 3D direction, which seems to get me excited. Letters and documents with mixed mediums and folds. So this is a still from a video demonstrating a model of an original European letter from 1702. This is part of the Brienne Postal Archive, and it's one of hundreds of such letters. The term for old school secure communications is called letter locking, which Jenni pointed out to me in June. The paper is rendered into a 3D object in this process, and there can be string textile elements as well as potentially seals. So now how do you take care of that shape while also taking care of the paper, which may need to be flattened? Paper plus cloth or leather, of course, can equal a book. This combination just flows logically for me as an interest. Books are mechanical structures, so when we conserve them, that's part of our considerations, taking care of the integrity of that mechanism as well as taking care of the component materials. Pigments can come into play in this arena as well. For instance, going back to the arsenic green for a sec, this arsenic green made an appearance in book cloth and also in ornately decorated end sheets. And taking things a step further with books. This is called a foredge painting. Yes, this is a hidden painting on the edges of the pages of the book that is only visible when they're arrayed in a particular way. I don't know how much more fun we could have with this medium. This is a select collection of English songs. That's the title of that book. So we could also take things back more in the direction of my interest in textiles with costume. So costume, these are incredibly complex 3D objects. They have corresponding challenges of display and storage. They incorporate a huge array of materials, including obviously textiles, but also plastic, metal, glass, bone, etc., etc. Those are, of course, in the findings, the zippers, the corsetry, all this. Conservation repairs have even been executed on women's costume using toned Japanese tissue. So again, a paper connection, even in costume. Let's see. Costume could incorporate synthetic materials. And if it's a rayon, for instance, it would actually be made of processed cellulose, which brings us back to paper. So, my work has always been about making a social contribution in ways that I'm well suited to do. And that's taken different forms over the years, but it's very important. So beyond thinking through what potential specializations would be fun, obviously it's important to consider what other pursuits I should devote my efforts to, because very few conservators are actually just at their benches treating objects. So I'll share some early thoughts about my possible niche, acknowledging that there is a lot of room for this to change. One thing I've surprised myself with at this internship has been an experimental mindset that I wasn't really aware of in past settings. And to be honest, I was very irritated by it at first because I came to this internship wanting to do this very exacting, very precise, and very perfect work right off the bat. Talk about unrealistic expectations. So I started to think, well, maybe this wacky experimental side is something that I can actually use as a strength, and start to think about combining it maybe with my love for research and for writing. Maybe I could contribute some sort of in-depth inquiry to the field. There are a lot of sort of dark, unexplored corners in conservation with lots of potential for that. So we'll see. I think I'd prefer to work at an archives, library, museum, some other sort of institution, perhaps, to be able to have the equipment, time, and funds to do those activities as part of my job description. So maybe I'll be able to harness my natural talents to make some contributions in that way. We'll see. Oops. Sorry about all the slide changes here. So even now, with 2 days left of my very first pre-program internship, I've been able to complete some contributions to this archives, which feels great. After learning and practicing skills, whoa, come back. We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay. After learning and practicing skills, we were able to apply them to work on projects with items from the collection, which was amazing. We really began to pick up the pace on this in the last, 2.5 weeks of the internship as our knowledge snowballed and we got more confident and gained traction. And man, I wish we could keep trucking, both to accomplish more for the archives and just to solidify everything that we've taken in. And it is a staggering amount, as Jenni will show. But a quick summary. We worked on historic maps. We consolidated bound ledgers, potentially for exhibition. We cleaned and are cleaning a bound volume of Sanborn maps with severe mold damage. And we're helping chip away at a survey of the microfilm to identify alternate storage needs. We worked on a lot of intangibles as well, all of which will contribute to outreach here. Facebook posts, photography for future use in Instagram accounts. We attended the spring, now summer workshop series, which was amazing. And we were able to help actually develop the content, the imagery, samples, and setup for these, which just took it to the nth degree as far as what we could learn from this. Additional intangibles that I know I'll take with me from here on out from this internship, so from the very start basically, are ideas we read about and discussed concerning the current state of conservation and its futures, including its responsibilities, its ethics. For me, a priority that was emerging but now has become very strong is issues of equity in the field, which is going to be really high on my list as I proceed. And I really think I have this internship and its thoughtful approach to thank for that. So multitudes of challenges in this field to focus on. And I'd like to let's go back. I'd like to close with this image of an installation by the contemporary Japanese artist Yayoi Kusama. These are tiny mirrored rooms that she calls infinity rooms. To me, this picture encapsulates how I'm feeling about the field of conservation at the moment. It's such a tiny field, and yet it really does contain multitudes. And I have the sense of there being territory to explore in literally every direction. So I'd like to thank the Friends of the Georgia Archives and History for funding this opportunity for us, because it's been absolutely amazing, and I can't wait to see where we take this and where future interns take this and where the program heads over the years. Thank you so much. And if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer, or I can turn it over to Jenni. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic then. Jenni, it's all you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Jenni Krchak, and I'd like to start by thanking FOGAH for funding this internship. Pre-program internships are really an integral part of being able to apply to a graduate conservation program. And by offering these paid internships, it really opens up the field to a much broader group of people. And I also want to thank Sigourney and Tracy and Chris and Dr. Denley for really advocating for this internship being able to go forward this year. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my prior conservation experience. And one of the first things that you learn as a pre-programmer is the importance of gaining experience in as many different areas of conservation as possible. And that's so that you can really figure out which specialization you should go into. So my first internship was at Vizcaya Museum and Gardens in Miami, Florida. And I'm going to call that my trial by fire internship because the first day was actually preparation for Hurricane Irma. And then the remainder of my internship was disaster response. So that was working mostly with objects and textiles. My second internship, I'm going to call the Grand Adventure because it was working with medieval wall paintings in a church in the UK. And the program was comprised of about 24 other participants that were from 10 different countries. So it ended up giving a really great holistic worldview of conservation. While the internship at the Georgia Archives is my third internship, it is actually my first time working with paper. And I have to say it's really gone above and beyond what I could have expected, just the sheer variety of projects and activities that we were able to work on, but also the level of enthusiasm and mentorship from Tracy and Sigourney. And I can say that from day one, they told us that they wanted to make this the best internship ever. And of course, Sigourney was very straightforward in saying that her ultimate goal was to turn us both into paper conservators. Okay, So what did we do during this internship? The short answer to that is everything. Excuse me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the workshops that we were able to participate in, some of the tours and connections that we were able to make, the specific projects, and then just my takeaways and kind of what I have planned next. As with many things during COVID, the Archive Spring Book and Paper Workshop series had to be rescheduled. But Sara and I were really fortunate in that all 4 were rescheduled during our internship. Prior to the start of our internship, Sigourney had emailed us to let us know that we had received funding to attend that first workshop, which was the weekend prior to our start date. And it was a great introduction to the archives, and it was actually on archival enclosures. And so these are just a few that we made in that workshop. And so from left to right, we have the classic cloth-covered clamshell box, the folder wrapper, which actually has a clear spine, so you can see the spine, but the book is fully enclosed and protected. Then we have the tuxedo wrapper, as you can see from the way that it is closed, where the tuxedo name comes from. And then a wrapper with the hard case and the corrugated clamshell box, which is on the bottom. Next in the series was preservation management. And honestly, this probably isn't one that I would have signed up for on my own, just because I'm not in a management position by any means. But the great thing about this workshop was that we were able to work with Sigourney on the actual development of the material. So we went through the entire presentation with her prior to that workshop, and were able to really have some great discussions with her and clarify some of the topics that were a little bit fuzzy to us. Also during that workshop, it gave a great holistic view of preservation management. And Chris Davidson was able to sit in on all 3 days, and he had some great insight into more of the upper level considerations for preservation management that I never would have even thought of on my own. So that was a good experience. Next was the paper conservation workshop. And while a lot of these treatments that were covered in the workshop we had already completed earlier in our internship, this gave us the opportunity to help with preparing for the workshop by making the sample materials for the class. And so here I'm working on some surface cleaning samples that have fake surface dirt. And so you make that by using cellulose powder mixed with fine charcoal. And then here Sara and Sigourney are working on tear repair samples. And then the actual workshop, we were able to kind of slow down and revisit all of those techniques that we had learned earlier on in the internship. And it was also a great group of people, very diverse group of people. We had 2 other conservators who attended. One was a paintings conservator, the other one worked with sculpture and then was also in an archive setting. And then there were also quite a few pre-program students, and then just some people who were interested in learning how to care for their own collections. And then coming up this Friday, we have the book conservation for circulating and reference collections. So on the first day of our work, which was the Monday following the enclosures workshop, we arrived and we were given the choice of 2 different workstations. So once we decided which space we wanted to be ours, we had our names placed in magnets on our workstations. We were also given our own flat file storage drawer so that we could store our projects that we would be working on throughout the internship. And again, we had our names on it. And then, of course, we had to be sorted into our respective Hogwarts houses. And so this was taken on the first day of the internship. And we had not been sorted yet, but you can see in teeny tiny writing where both Sara and I had already earned 2 points apiece. And ultimately, I was sorted into Ravenclaw, and Sara was sorted into Hufflepuff. So you can see that we have made significant gains in our time here. I will say that Ravenclaw does have a bit of an advantage because Tracy is also in Ravenclaw, and well, Sigourney is Slytherin, so what can you do? One thing that we did every week was journal club. And the point of journal club was to find an article and then discuss it. And Sigourney really wanted us to have these great dialogues, these great discussions, with an emphasis on decision making and really gaining a holistic view of the field. And so if you look at the different articles that we read and discussed, the majority of them actually cover more of the philosophical, ethical, and decision-making sides of conservation as opposed to the treatment side. Because ultimately, we're the ones responsible for the future of these objects. So while the treatments may be relatively simple, being able to decide when to use them and how far to go is the tricky part. During this internship, even though we're in the time of COVID, Sigourney and Tracy really wanted it to be a traditional internship in the sense of having tours and making connections. So we were able to virtually tour the Atlanta Art Conservation Center, the Carless Museum at Emory University Library, and then we were able to visit in person the State Record Center and had a great tour from Chris. And then we also went to visit Big River Bindery, where Andrew Hewitt is the book conservator. Another connection that we were able to make was through Sigourney, and that was Debbie Norris. And she is the head of conservation at the University of Delaware, which is one of the 4 graduate programs in the US. So both Sara and I were able to have one-on-one conversations with Debbie and just kind of talk about the field of conservation and some next steps that we could be taking. So before we could start working on actual objects in the collections, we needed to practice. We needed to practice all of these different types of techniques. So here Sara is working on a backing removal, and you can see that she has a lovely Sigourney Smuts original artwork. And so with a backing removal, you would have your artwork that is attached to a backing board. And before you can even begin to treat that object, you have to take that backing board off. So the only way to do that is to either carve or peel away the layers of that backing board until you finally get to the back of your original object. So by the end of this little exercise, we had a huge pile of paper shavings, and it looked like white chocolate and was just, it was very frustrating. Okay. We also practiced tear repairs. So this was my sample object, and it was deaccessioned from the collections. And you can see that one area in particular where the paper had split along a fold line, and then also the edges had been folded back. So after a little local humidification along those creases, I was able to complete the mends, and that was using Japanese paper, which is a very thin and lightweight paper, but incredibly strong. And then the adhesive was wheat starch paste. So you can see this is the final treated document. And then on the verso, those lighter lines are actually the mends that were done with the Japanese paper. We also practiced humidification and flattening, and I don't know why, but every single picture of us doing this humidification, we look incredibly serious. So I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's the stance you have to take. We practiced washing, again with a Sigourney Smuts original. So we had float washing and then full immersion washing. And then a little bit later, I'm going to talk about blotter washing. And of course, after you wash something, you have to be able to take it out of the water. So there was quite a bit of practicing with just handling the wet paper. Sorry, Sarah's over here laughing. In addition to washing, we also learned a few other treatments, including chelating, which helps to pull out minerals and metals, and then bleaching. And those are typically done as spray applications or with a brush, and then it is washed again. So now that we had learned all of these different treatments and techniques, we were given our very own object from the collections to work on. So this is a soil map of Muskogee County from 1922, and the blue lines indicate the creases and folds, and then the red lines show where there were tears. A couple of other issues with this map: there was tape on 3 out of the 4 corners, and then also a fairly significant loss in the upper left-hand corner. There was not much in terms of surface dirt or discoloration from acidity, aside from localized discoloration along the fold lines, which you can see on the verso. Before any treatment could begin, we needed to spot test. And we were spot testing for any kind of sensitivity to just DI water. And when you spot test everything. You spot test every printing color, but also any additional inscriptions like this blue ballpoint. And then on the verso, we had 3 different types of media and inscriptions. So we had a green colored pencil, again, blue ballpoint, and graphite. So all of these things were tested and everything was stable, so made life easier. I could move on with the treatment. Next, the map was dry surface cleaned using a soft brush and a variety of different erasers and sponges. And then the pressure sensitive tape needed to be addressed. And the best method that I found for removing that was with a scalpel and a spatula that I used a little hot plate to heat. And that allowed me to soften that adhesive and lift the carrier off. And then I could reduce the remaining adhesive residue using a crepe eraser. Next, I locally humidified the creases with a water pen and then pressed them to reduce any of the planar distortions. Okay. Then tear repairs, again using the Japanese tissue and wheat starch paste, and those were applied on the verso. And so you can see that both of these treatments, the local humidification for flattening and the tear repairs with the wheat starch paste, would introduce moisture to the object. So that's why spot testing at the very beginning is so important, because if you just jumped right into this and your media was sensitive to water, it would be a problem. So spot test everything. The final bit of treatment was to apply a bridging mend of Japanese tissue, and that was applied using wheat starch paste again. And the purpose of this bridging mend was to protect the edges of the loss from any further damage. So you can see on the right where that mend has been applied, and it looks much more stable. But you can also see where that tape has been removed, but there is still some staining remaining from that adhesive residue. And that cannot be removed. So don't use tape, please. That was one of my big takeaways from this internship. Never use tape. Will make a lot of conservators happy. Okay, so after the object had been treated, it was encapsulated in a custom Mylar sleeve. And so here, Tracy is showing us how to set up the ultrasonic welder, which eliminates any need for heat or adhesives, which could adversely affect the object in the future. And then the map and its lovely shiny Mylar sleeve. So now it can go back into the collections and be available for patrons. Sorry. Okay. Another project that we were able to assist on was this map of Fulton County from 1893. And it's a very large scale map. It's about 10 feet by 4 feet, and it's comprised of 6 sheets of paper that have been glued together with a water-soluble animal glue and then adhered to a fabric lining. So before we arrived, Sigourney had already gone through and separated the sections, applied facings to any of the fragile areas of the map so that they would be stable, and then removed the linings from those sections. Sara and I were each assigned our own section of the map to work on. So that was Sara's section. It's coming. And my section. There we go. So here on Sara's section, you can see these tide lines from where they were separated. And those were, of course, water soluble, so they came right out in the wash. It was great. So first step, spot test everything. You can see this is a recurring theme. With this particular treatment, it was more involved than the soil map that I discussed previously. So it meant more spot testing. So again, you're going to spot test all of the different printing colors, but also the written inscriptions and any kind of applied materials. So in this case, the little labels with the red border had to be spot tested. And then you even spot test just the plain paper. And you test all of these different areas with any solution that you plan to use on the object. And that includes any different concentrations of the same solution, because while the media might be stable at a lower concentration, if you bump it up a 0.5% or a full percentage point, then it may not be stable anymore. So this really helps to direct your final treatment plan and what you can and cannot do. So then we had to cut the Japanese paper that would be used for the lining. We humidified. Sorry, I decided not to include the lovely intense spray humidification photo. But after we spray for humidification, then we place it under plastic, and the object is allowed to humidify, and that helps to relax the fibers of the paper so that it can go through the washing process in a more even and successful way. So here we are applying the wash solution to the Evolon, and so we're soaking that Evolon fabric with the wash solution. And then we place the object onto that fabric, and it is blotter washed. So this is called blotter washing. Traditionally, you would use blotter paper, but this Evolon fabric is a reusable material and is actually a lot easier to work with. So the wash solution is a pH adjusted solution that is used to reduce the soluble acidity in the object and any kind of discoloration. So we did this several times and then finished by applying an alkali solution to introduce a buffer to the paper. Next, the lining, the Japanese paper, was humidified and pasted up with wheat starch paste. And then here you can see Sara assisting Sigourney with dropping that lining down onto the back of the map, hence the term drop lining. So here is Sara's section before we washed and lined it, and then after. And then my section before washing and lining, and after. So now everything is stable, and just the facing tissue has to be removed, and then again surface cleaned. Another project that we've been a part of is the MICROFilm survey, and the reels that were pulled are ones that have been pulled by patrons, or have been the most requested by patrons. And the purpose of this survey is to identify the cellulose acetate film for cold storage. And we did that by using this little viewfinder, and it has polarized film that is crossed. So when you place the reel of film in between and you close it, if the film looks black, then it is cellulose acetate. However, if it has this oil slick appearance to it, then that means it's a polyester film. And while polyester is stable, cellulose acetate is not. So that's why it needs to be identified for proper storage. A couple of other projects. With mold remediation, we have the Sanborn maps. And you can see when we opened it up, it had a lot of water damage and also mold. And so here Tracy is demonstrating how to work in the fume hood and safely remove the mold. And of course, she's got on all of the proper PPE for working with mold. Oops, sorry. Then we had leather consolidation, and there were several volumes that are going to be hopefully be part of an exhibit on accounting books. And to consolidate the leather, we used Klucel G, and that helps to stabilize the leather so that it does not continue to degrade. So here is Sara working on, I think it was a blacksmith's ledger. Okay. We also consolidated a little bit of the marbled paper that was on the cover boards of these ledgers, and that was done with wheat starch paste. As part of the internship, we were able to bring a few personal items with us that we could work on as practice. And so one of the things that I decided to bring was this family photo album from around the 1890s. And I brought it because it's just a really interesting object, and it had a lot of different materials and problems. So I was able to begin removing the excessive amount of tape, again with a heated scalpel. And I was able to remove the cover. And you can see I still have another piece of tape to remove from the spine, but it is significantly better. And then next I will begin working on the individual pages and ultimately reassemble the album and hopefully create a custom enclosure for it. So all of the things that I have learned during the internship, I'll be able to apply to this one project. There are also some loose items that were kind of tucked into the pages, so I'll have to figure out a way to address those and how to house those with the little album. And I'm hoping that this particular project will be able to become a part of my conservation portfolio that I will use to apply to graduate school in the fall. And as a way to continue to practice all of these treatments and techniques that we have learned, Sara and I placed an order with Talus Conservation Supplies, and we're really looking forward to being able to continue to hone all of these skills that we have learned during our internship. Thank you. Questions?
If anyone has any questions for either Sara or Jenni, I'm going to give a few minutes for you to compose them. You can either unmute yourself and say them out loud, or you can type them in the chat box and then Tracy can read them aloud. Yes, Henry.
It's a question that's we all have to look at for the upcoming months, but specifically for you guys, what's next?
So you're going to have to step up to the mic.
Do you want to go first, Jenni? You don't care. Please state the question.
Okay, so Henry asked what our plans are in the upcoming months. I'm going back home. And as you can see, I already have some plans for projects that I can work on while I'm at home, but also just looking for that next internship opportunity, and then hopefully applying to graduate school this fall.
Yeah, and what's next for me, I too am going back to Chattanooga just until I figure out whether some plans that I had in the works for the fall are actually going to fall through or go through, depending on COVID. It looks like they're probably going to fall through, unfortunately. I hope to do book conservation and paper conservation, if not in the fall, maybe in spring of next year. And just picking up work and doing self-study. There's a lot to practice, which is great. Yeah.
Martha asked, could you define consolidation?
We have a question asking to define consolidation. Who would like to take that one?
This is not my presentation.
Okay, so Martha asked what is consolidation. And the way I understand it is that you're just trying to kind of hold everything together so that, like with the leather, it tends to degrade and become almost powdery. So with a consolidant, you are stopping that degradation, or at least putting it at bay for a little while.
Holding loose pieces together.
Yes.
Any other questions? Got one from Penny in the audience.
Sara and Jenni, it looks like you worked on lots of really, really interesting projects.
Oh yeah.
If you were to pick one, both of you, which would it be? Really stands out to you.
So Penny has asked, what is their one most favorite project that they've worked on?
Okay, well, luckily Jenni quizzed us on this morning as we were driving here. And my knee-jerk reaction remains the toning, color matching and toning of the paper. It went way back many years to my experience with doing a lot of painting in oils and just mixing those colors. And then, you know, having that side-by-side comparison. How will this color translate on a piece of paper as opposed to a piece of cloth? Just super fun, super interesting.
The toning of the paper was part of a larger exercise that we did, and that was with actually making books. And that still is one of my favorites from this internship, because it taught you how to make a book and then how to take it apart, how to repair it, and just all of these different techniques, but also making you mindful of materials that you had used. I know when I made the first book, I was like, I'm going to make sure this is glued down well. It's not going to go anywhere. And then that was the book that I had to take apart and put back together. So at that point, I was thinking, oh, why did I use so much glue on this? Because I was having to deal with it.
Do we have any other questions?
In terms of you guys' work with different types of material, which type of paper, which type of material did you find? I know I've learned tape is really, really bad. Besides tape, are there things that should be avoided or things that are particularly helpful in making sure that a paper object is preserved or conserved?
Thanks for that question. The question was whether there are additional issues around paper that should be avoided to make sure that it can be conserved properly, in addition to the accursed adhesive tape. Well, another fastener that's a huge issue are paper clips. Everyone here at the archives could attest to that. I noticed whenever we get documents from Tracy here at the archives, they never have fasteners on them. And I think it's too painful to pop that paper clip on the corner. You have discoloration and particles of rust, oxidation off of them a lot of times. They can also dent the paper so that there are planar distortions, and sometimes they can pierce the paper.
A quick little
Thanks so much.
a quick little side note to the previous question and how we both referenced that book project. I did not include that in my presentation, but we actually did a post on it on Facebook. So if you go to the archives Facebook page, you can read about that particular project.
Any other questions? Right, then I'd like to wrap up and say, firstly, a massive thank you to both Sara and Jenni. They have been an absolute pleasure to work with. And as you can see, they were highly engaged interns who really went above and beyond. They didn't stop studying when they left the archives at the end of the day. They would quite often come the next morning and describe articles and things that they had done in the evenings and work through weekends. They have really taken this so seriously, and just their enthusiasm and eagerness to learn as much as possible was just made me want to teach them more. And I do have to apologize for the frequent times of just giving you too much of a information dump at once, but you did a great job of keeping up as far as possible. I would also like to thank the FOGAH board for sponsoring this internship. As they have said, pre-program internships are incredibly important. A sad fact of them is also that most of them are either completely unfunded or underfunded for their locations, which can then mean that wonderful potential interns and conservators won't be able to enter the field because they can't afford to take that time away from a paid job. So it's just fantastic that they do sponsor these internships, and we are so thrilled, Tracy and I, in conservation, to see how much we can grow and expand this program over the years, and hopefully have a cohort of alumni that can sing the praises of the Georgia Archives and the wonderful work that we do here. And also, as Jenni mentioned, we'd like to give a special thanks to Chris Davidson and Dr. Denley. With COVID, there was a strong chance that the internship would have to be cancelled this year, and they really went above and beyond to make sure that we could make this happen this year and give them, Sara and Jenni, the opportunity to really expand their education. And we have become our own pandemic pod in conservation in the lab, and kind of the idea of extending our family bubble to each other was not just in terms of the pandemic, but was more of a relationship thing as well. And I really do feel that they have become part of our lives in the archives, and we'll be very sad to see them go. So thank you to everyone for attending, and have a wonderful day. And please do keep up with the Georgia Archives Facebook page, because we are planning on posting a few more things about the internship and what they have done, and you can keep track with that. So thank you again.